Turkish people. The Turks or the Anatolian Turks are an Turkic ethnic group. They are the most numerous ethnic group among the Turkic peoples. In addition, a Turkish diaspora has been established with modern migration, particularly in Western Europe, North America, and Oceania. Historical minorities and Creole populations of Turkish descent dating back to the early modern period exist in the former lands of the Ottoman Empire, such as the Balkans, the Middle East, and North Africa, while more recent displacement of Meskhetian Turks from the Caucasus has resulted in new minorities in many former Soviet states. Etymology and ethnic identity. The ethnonym Turk may be first mentioned in Herodotus' work Targetes. Furthermore, during the 1st century CE, Pomponius Mela refers to the Tur Sea in the forests north of the Sea of Azov, and Pliny the Elder lists the Tur Sea among the people of the same area. The first definite reference to the Turks come mainly from Chinese sources in the 6th century. In these sources, Turk appears as Tuju, which referred to the Gokturks. Although Turk refers to Turkish people, it may also sometimes refer to the wider language group of Turkic peoples. They are closely related to Azerbaijani people, also known as Azerbaijani Turks, who lived primarily in Azerbaijan Republic and Iran in the 19th century. The word Turk only referred to Anatolian villages. The Ottoman ruling class identified themselves as Ottomans, not usually as Turks. In the late 19th century, as the Ottoman upper classes adopted European ideas of nationalism, the term Turk took on a much more positive connotation. The Turkish speakers of Anatolia were the most loyal supporters of Ottoman rule. During Ottoman times, the millet system defined communities on a religious basis, and a residue of this remains in that Turkish villages commonly consider as Turks only those who profess the Sunni faith. Turkish Jews, Christians, or even Alevists may be considered non-Turks. On the other hand, Kurdish or Arab followers of the Sunni branch of Islam who live in eastern Anatolia are sometimes considered Turks. Article 66 of the Turkish Constitution defines a Turk as anyone who is bound to the Turkish state through the bond of citizenship. History. Prehistory, Ancient Era and Early Middle Ages. Anatolia was first inhabited by hunter-gatherers during the Paleolithic era, and in antiquity was inhabited by various ancient Anatolian peoples. After Alexander the Great's conquest in 334 BC, the area was Hellenized, and by the 1st century BC it is generally thought that the native Anatolian languages became extinct. In Central Asia, the earliest surviving Turkic language texts, the 8th century Orkhon inscriptions, were erected by the Gokturks in the 6th century CE, and include words not common to Turkic but found in unrelated Inner Asian languages. Although the ancient Turks were nomadic, they traded wool, leather, carpets, and horses for wood, silk, vegetables and grain, as well as having large ironworking stations in the south of the Altai Mountains during the 600s CE. Most of the Turkic peoples were followers of Tengriism, sharing the cult of the sky god Tengra, although there were also adherents of Manichaeism, Nestorian Christianity and Buddhism. However, during the Muslim conquests, the Turks entered the Muslim world proper as servants. During the booty of Arab raids and conquests, the Turks began converting to Islam after Muslim conquest of Transoxiana through the efforts of missionaries, Sufis, and merchants. Although initiated by the Arabs, the conversion of the Turks to Islam was filtered through Persian and Central Asian culture. Under the Umayyads, most were domestic servants, whilst under the Abbasids, increasing numbers were trained as soldiers. By the 9th century, Turkish commanders were leading the caliph's Turkish troops into battle. As the Abbasid Caliphate declined, Turkish officers assumed more military and political power, taking over or establishing provincial dynasties with their own corps of Turkish troops. Seljuk era. During the 11th century, the Seljuk Turks grew in number and were able to occupy the eastern province of the Abbasid Empire. By 1055, the Seljuk Empire captured Baghdad and began to make their first incursions into the edges of Anatolia. When the Seljuk Turks won the Battle of Manzikert against the Byzantine Empire in 1071, it opened the gates of Anatolia to them. Although ethnically Turkish, the Seljuk Turks appreciated and became the purveyors of the Persian culture rather than the Turkish culture. Nonetheless, the Turkish language and Islam were introduced and gradually spread over the region, and the slow transition from a predominantly Christian and Greek-speaking Anatolia to a predominantly Muslim and Turkish-speaking one was underway. In dire straits, the Byzantine Empire turned to the west for help, setting in motion the pleas that led to the First Crusade. Once the Crusaders took Iznik, the Seljuk Turks established the Sultanate of Rum from their new capital, Konya, in 1097. By the 12th century, the Europeans had begun to call the Anatolian region Turchia, or Turkey, meaning the land of the Turks. The Turkish society of Anatolia was divided into urban, rural and nomadic populations. The other Turkoman tribes who had also swept into Anatolia at the same time as the Seljuk Turks were those who kept their nomadic ways. These tribes were more numerous than the Seljuk Turks, and rejecting the sedentary lifestyle, adhered to an Islam impregnated with animism and shamanism from their Central Asian steppeland origins, which then mixed with new Christian influences. From this popular and syncretist Islam, with its mystical and revolutionary aspects, sects such as the Alevis and Bektashis emerged. Furthermore, the intermarriage between the Turks and local inhabitants, as well as the conversion of many to Islam, also increased the Turkish-speaking Muslim population in Anatolia. By 1243, at the Battle of Kozaydag, the Mongols defeated the Seljuk Turks and became the new rulers of Anatolia, and in 1256, the Second Mongol invasion of Anatolia caused widespread destruction. Particularly after 1277, political stability within the Seljuk territories rapidly disintegrated, leading to the strengthening of Turkoman principalities in the western and southern parts of Anatolia called the Beyliks. Beyliks era. Once the Seljuk Turks were defeated by the Mongols' conquest of Anatolia, the Turks became the vassal of the Ilkhans, who established their own empire in the vast area stretching from present-day Afghanistan to present-day Turkey. As the Mongols occupied more lands in Asia Minor, the Turks moved further to western Anatolia and settled in the Seljuk-Byzantine frontier. By the last decades of the 13th century, the Ilkhans and their Seljuk vassals lost control over much of Anatolia to these Turkoman peoples. A number of Turkish lords managed to establish themselves as rulers of various principalities, known as beyliks, or emirates. Amongst these beyliks, along the Aegean coast, from north to south, stretched the beyliks of Karasi, Saruhan, Aydın, Menteş and Tekke. Inland from Tekke was Hamid, and east of Karasi was the beylik of Jermaygan. To the northwest of Anatolia, around Sogut, was the small and, at this stage, insignificant, Ottoman beylik. It was hemmed into the east by other more substantial powers like Karaman on Iconium, which ruled from the Kızılırmak River to the Mediterranean. Although the Ottomans were only a small principality among the numerous Turkish beyliks, and thus posed the smallest threat to the Byzantine authority, their location in northwestern Anatolia, in the former Byzantine province of Bithynia, became a fortunate position for their future conquests. The Latins, who had conquered the city of Constantinople in 1204 during the Fourth Crusade, established a Latin empire, divided the former Byzantine territories in the Balkans in the Aegean among themselves, and forced the Byzantine emperors into exile at Nicaea. From 1261 onwards, the Byzantines were largely preoccupied with regaining their control in the Balkans. Toward the end of the 13th century, as Mongol power began to decline, the Turkoman chiefs assumed greater independence. Ottoman Empire under its founder, Osman I. The Ottoman Beylik expanded along the Sakarya River and westward towards the Sea of Marmara. Thus, the population of Western Asia Minor had largely become Turkish-speaking and Muslim in religion. It was under his son, Orhan I, who had attacked and conquered the important urban center of Bursa in 1326, proclaiming it as the Ottoman capital, that the Ottoman Empire developed considerably. In 1354, the Ottomans crossed into Europe and established a foothold on the Gallipoli Peninsula while at the same time pushing east and taking Ankara. Many Turks from Anatolia began to settle in the region abandoned by the inhabitants who had fled Thrace before the Ottoman invasion. However, the Byzantines were not the only ones to suffer from the Ottoman advancement, for, in the mid-1330s, Orhan annexed the Turkish Beylik of Karati. This advancement was maintained by Murad I, who more than tripled the territories under his direct rule, reaching some 100,000 square miles, evenly distributed in Europe and Asia Minor. Gains in Anatolia were matched by those in Europe once the Ottoman forces took Edirne, which became the capital of the Ottoman Empire in 1365. They opened their way into Bulgaria and Macedonia in 1371 at the Battle of Maritsa. With the conquests of Thrace, Macedonia, and Bulgaria, significant numbers of Turkish emigrants settled in these regions. This form of Ottoman Turkish colonization became a very effective method to consolidate their position and power in the Balkans. The settlers consisted of soldiers, nomads, farmers, artisans and merchants, dervishes, preachers and other religious functionaries, and administrative personnel. In 1453, Ottoman armies, under Sultan Mehmed II, conquered Constantinople. Mehmed reconstructed and repopulated the city, and made it the new Ottoman capital. After the fall of Constantinople, the Ottoman Empire entered a long period of conquest and expansion, with its borders eventually going deep into Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. Selim I dramatically expanded the empire's eastern and southern frontiers in the Battle of Chaldiran and gained recognition as the guardian of the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. His successor, Suleiman the Magnificent, further expanded the conquest after capturing Belgrade in 1521 and using its territorial base to conquer Hungary and other Central European territories, after his victory in the Battle of Mohacs, as well as also pushing the frontiers of the empire to the east. Following Suleiman's death, Ottoman victories continued, albeit less frequently than before. The island of Cyprus was conquered, in 1571, bolstering Ottoman dominance over the sea routes of the eastern Mediterranean. However, after its defeat at the Battle of Vienna, in 1683, the Ottoman army was met by ambushes and further defeats. The 1699 Treaty of Karlowitz, which granted Austria the provinces of Hungary and Transylvania, marked the first time in history that the Ottoman Empire actually relinquished territory. By the 19th century, the empire began to decline when ethno-nationalist uprisings occurred across the empire. Thus, the last quarter of the 19th and the early part of the 20th century saw some 7 to 9 million Muslim refugees from the lost territories of the Caucasus, Crimea, Balkans, and the Mediterranean islands migrate to Anatolia and eastern Thrace. By 1913, the government of the Committee of Union and Progress started a program of forcible Turkification of non-Turkish minorities. By 1914, the World War I broke out, and the Turks scored some success in Gallipoli during the Battle of the Dardanelles in 1915. During World War I, the government of the Committee of Union and Progress continued with its Turkification policies, which affected non-Turkish minorities, such as the Armenians during the Armenian Genocide and the Greeks during various campaigns of ethnic cleansing and expulsion. In 1918, the Ottoman government agreed to the Mudros Armistice with the Allies. The Treaty of Chevreuse, signed in 1920 by the government of Mehmet I, dismantled the Ottoman Empire. The Turks, under Mustafa Kemal, rejected the treaty and fought the Turkish War of Independence, resulting in the abortion of that text, never ratified, and the abolition of the Sultanate. Thus, the 623-year-old Ottoman Empire ended. Modern era. Once Mustafa Kemal Ataturk led the Turkish War of Independence against the Allied forces that occupied the former Ottoman Empire. He united the Turkish Muslim majority and successfully led them from 1919 to 1922 in overthrowing the occupying forces out of what the Turkish national movement considered the Turkish homeland. The Turkish identity became the unifying force when, in 1923, the Treaty of Lausanne was signed and the newly founded Republic of Turkey was formally established. Ataturk's presidency was marked by a series of radical political and social reforms that transformed Turkey into a secular, modern republic with civil and political equality for sectarian minorities and women. Throughout the 1920s and the 1930s, Turks, as well as other Muslims, from the Balkans, the Black Sea, the Aegean Islands, the island of Cyprus, the Sanjak of Alexandretta, the Middle East, and the Soviet Union continued to arrive in Turkey, most of whom settled in urban northwestern Anatolia. The bulk of these immigrants, known as Muhacirs, were the Balkan Turks who faced harassment and discrimination in their homelands. However, there were still remnants of a Turkish population in many of these countries because the Turkish government wanted to preserve these communities so that the Turkish character of these neighboring territories could be maintained. One of the last stages of ethnic Turks immigrating to Turkey was between 1940 and 1990, when about 700,000 Turks arrived from Bulgaria. Today, between a third and a quarter of Turkey's population are the descendants of these immigrants. Genetics. The extent to which gene flow from Central Asia has contributed to the current gene pool of the Turkish people, and the role of the 11th century invasion by Turkic peoples, has been the subject of various studies. Several studies have concluded that the historical and indigenous Anatolian groups are the primary source of the present-day Turkish population. This is unsurprising, as the Turkish people are a collection of assimilated peoples who were formed from their adoption of Islam and the Turkish language, with even the Turkish state considering all those who have citizenship there to be Turkish. Furthermore, various studies suggested that, although the early Turkic invaders carried out an invasion with cultural significance, including the introduction of the Old Anatolian Turkish language and Islam, the genetic contribution from Central Asia may have been very small. According to American Journal of Physical Anthropology, today's Turkish people are more closely related with the Balkan populations than to the Central Asian populations. And a study looking into allele frequencies suggested that there was a lack of genetic relationship between the Mongols and the Turks, despite the historical relationship of their languages. Multiple studies suggested an elite cultural dominance-driven linguistic replacement model to explain the adoption of Turkish language by Anatolian indigenous inhabitants. A study involving mitochondrial analysis of a Byzantine-era population, whose samples were gathered from excavations in the archaeological site of Sagalassus, found that the samples had close genetic affinity with modern Turkish and Balkan populations. During their research on leukemia, a group of Armenian scientists observed high genetic matching between Turks, Kurds, and Armenians. And other studies found the peoples of the Caucasus are closest to the Turkish population among sampled European, Middle Eastern, and Central, South, and East Asian populations. Y-DNA haplogroup distributions in Turkish people. According to Sanayiglu al., there are many Y-DNA haplogroups present in Turkey. The majority haplogroups are shared with their West Asian and Caucasian neighbors. By contrast, Central Asian haplogroups are rarer, N in Q 5.7%, India H R2 1.5%, and Africa E3*, E3A 1%. Some of the percentages identified were J2 equals 24%, J2 typical of West Mediterranean populations. AL1B equals 14.7%, widespread in Western Eurasia, with distinct West Asian and a West European lineages. G equals 10.9%, typical of people from the Caucasus and to a lesser extent the Middle East, southern parts of Central Asia, and Europe. E3BM35 equals 10.7%. EM78 occurs commonly, and is found in northern and eastern Africa. Western Asia haplogroup EM123 is found in both Africa and Eurasia. J1 equals 9%, typical amongst people from the Arabian Peninsula and Dagestan. AL1A equals 6.9%, common in various Central Asian, North Indian, and Eastern European populations. I equals 5.3%, common in Scandinavia, Sardinia, the Balkans, Eastern Europe and among Kurds. K equals 4.5%, typical of Asian populations and Caucasian populations. L equals 4.2%, typical of Indian subcontinent and Khorasan populations. Found sporadically in the Middle East and the Caucasus. N equals 3.8%, typical of Uralic, Siberian and Altaic populations. T equals 2.5%, typical of Mediterranean, Middle Eastern, Northeast African and South Asian populations. Q equals 1.9%, typical of Northern Altaic populations. C equals 1.3%, typical of Mongolic and Siberian populations. R2 equals 0.96%, typical of South Asian population. Others markers than occurs in less than 1% are H, A, E3A, O, R1 asterisk.